Well, on May 14th, I think it was May 15th, 1953, a long time ago, my dad, who's now 79, he was 24 years old. He was driving in a car. The car got into an accident. It caught on fire. My dad didn't get out. He was burned, and burned really severely. That was 55 years ago. He's still alive. And nobody did anything wrong. He didn't do anything wrong. The driver didn't do anything wrong. It just happened. And it created a different future for him and a different present right now than would have happened if that would not have happened. Junk came into his life. And what we're going to talk about tonight is how do you live with that? How do you do something good with a life when stuff comes in that really does discombobulate you? It does change the direction of your life. And so what we're going to do is my dad's going to come out, and I'm just going to have him share his story with you. Now, here's what I need to tell you. If you've never been around people who are handicapped, disabled, whatever term you want to use, sometimes you feel kind of uncomfortable, and you think, oh, gosh, guess what? My dad is the funniest guy in the whole world. He's the most well-adjusted guy, which is why he's here talking to you tonight. He's one of the most well-adjusted guys. I learned to tell stories by listening to my dad. I learned how to tell inappropriate stories by listening to my dad. So I'm going to bring him out, and I'm just going to give you my own disclaimer. If I do say something offensive, I'm really sorry. If my dad says something offensive, it's on him, and I don't know anything about it. So, hey, Dad, come on out if you can see your way through here, through the lights. This is my dad, Gene Gerwig. So, my dad has no problem walking, but he calls me, I don't know, it's Friday morning, and he goes, I rode too long on my exercise bike. I think I wrecked my knee. I don't know if I can come. I couldn't even get off the potty this morning. And so we didn't know if he was going to make it, and God allowed him to come. And so, Dad, thanks for coming so much. Is your mic on? Is it working?
I'm not sure.
Here, we'll go. Hey, Omar, can you take care of that? Get on there. Thanks.
It might be better off with it off.
No, then we can't hear your lovely speaking voice. So what we're going to do is my dad's going to tell you a little bit about his story. Then we're going to tell you about our family life. We had a really, I'll just tell you, I was talking to my dad this morning. You know what? I had a charmed, magical childhood. My parents were the best parents. Had a great childhood. And then finally we're going to talk about how has God used the junk that came into my dad's life, circumstantial junk, nobody's fault, for the greater good. And it's a good story. It's a good story. So, Dad, you were 25.
No, it was 2 days before my 24th birthday.
2 days before your 24th birthday?
Right on my oldest brother's birthday.
No, birthday.
His lucky birthday.
That was his lucky birthday for certain. So, can you tell everybody a little bit, how did the accident happen? What happened?
Well, actually, after the accident, they said I was the only person who could tell them anything about it, and I don't have the foggiest idea of what I told them. But from what I can figure and things that I've heard since, I had caught a ride. I was in the Navy at the time, and I caught a ride with a friend of a friend. I was hitchhiking, going to hitchhike home and pick up my car, do some repairs on it, and drive it back. But on the way, I caught a ride with this guy to Lancaster, as far as Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and he just bought this car. It was a 40 Ford, nice old 40 Ford. But he just wanted, he lived in Lancaster, and he's gone home to buy some insurance for it. Unfortunately, we had to wreck before he bought the insurance.
That's the way it always works.
So anyway, it was on a 3-lane highway, and I think he had pulled over to pass somebody, and this was at twilight, and we was going from New London, Connecticut. So we'd been on the road for hours all day, and it was right at twilight in the evening, and I can imagine he was pretty tired, but he pulled over to pass. And hit a parked car that had stopped to make a left to go into a filling station from what I had heard. And I guess he fell out of the car and broke his hand and got a little burn in the back of his neck. And I know absolutely nothing from there, which is probably very good. And I think it's probably one of God's ways of taking care of us when it gets something that's too severe for us to handle ourselves. We go into a shock or whatever, and we feel no pain or anything, nothing about it. But it's probably very good that I didn't. It probably wasn't very pleasant.
Yeah, I'm thinking a car on fire is totally unpleasant.
No. And from what I heard from other people, from a nurse that was taking care of me in that hospital, is that they would try to get me out, and air would get under me, and of course fire would burst around me again. So they dropped me back down and then come back and try to get me again. But I was very lucky in another respect, that in Lancaster, the doctor that was there, his name was Dr. James Z. Apple. He was the foremost doctor on burns at the time. Used to be head of Brooke Army Hospital, who is the foremost hospital in burns. So I happened to be got taken right to the hospital that the doctor was at. It was the best in the world on burns. And that's the only reason I'm here today, and one of the reasons. The other reasons is that I got very good care and was determined not to die. And one of the things that I heard early on in it, somebody said, well, he's going to die. And in the Navy, you only use last names. So I'd say to myself, this sort of an argument I had with myself. Okay, Gerwig, you're going to die. Nah, Gerwig, you're not going to die. And I'd be like, okay, so you're going to die. There's no big deal. And then again, I'd tell myself, nah, Gerwig, you're not going to die. And that was another reason I didn't die.
So, Dad, you were burned over 98% of your body.
My total burns were 95 to 98. Third degree burns were 45 to 55. And at that time, I imagine they're greater today because they learned a lot. As a matter of fact, they said they learned a lot from me. But you're not supposed to live after 45% burns. You just lose too much body fluids. You can't keep them in, and all your organs will go kaput.
And so they gave you a 0% chance to survive.
No chance whatsoever.
Yeah. And then after you got better, about every 10 years, they told you had about 10 more years?
Well, no, they didn't tell me after I lasted the first 10, I guess. But the first thing they said, well, my life expectancy would probably be about 10 years.
That was how many years ago?
55, wasn't it? Yeah. Most of the doctors that said that are already gone.
Yeah, I laughed at you. That's awesome, yeah. Yeah, you can't kill my dad. He's death-proof. It's like you can't kill him, you know. So, Dad, you've obviously had all kinds of reconstructive surgery.
A little bit.
A little bit, yeah. And you told me today that you've had how many surgeries that they don't know, but how many do they think?
Well, I had one doctor in the VA tried to count them up, counting backwards from where he was, and this is several years after the original accident. But he got back to the early stages of it, where in grafting, even just to put bandages, they didn't put bandages; they just put saline gauze over the burns and the grafts and so on. But they would take me to the operating room to do this. And is that an operation or is it not? And, of course, there was many things wrong with me. A team of eye doctors would come in and work on my eyes. A team of orthopedic surgeons would come in and work on arms and things of this type and all the different areas. And he'd say, well, is that one operation? Is it two operations? If this guy did two operations, is that two more operations? So exactly what it was. But he said, what I did was I totaled it out. I figured you've had at least 300. And that was quite a few years ago. I had several after that. Yeah. But it was once a week the first year or two. It was about every Friday I would go to the operating room and get 1, 2, 3 operations out.
So, Dad, you were saying that you were in and out of consciousness after the accident in Pennsylvania for about 6 or 7 months. And
after I was in Pennsylvania, I was there for 2 weeks.
Oh, okay. Well, how long was it before you became...
And then they transferred into the Naval Hospital. Uh-huh. And the doctor there said, well, if that guy could keep me alive for 2 weeks, he could keep me alive. And here I am.
Yeah. So you were in and out of consciousness for how long, though?
Right now, I rebirth. I right around 9 months.
Wow.
So,
and then you were in the hospital on and off for how many years after that?
About 6, I'd say steady 6 years, and I would come out for, I had to find out what come up. They would delay my operations because they thought I was going to be there forever. And I was I was scheduled for an operation, walking by the nurse station. I heard one of the nurses say, cancel Gene, he's going to be here, and we can do him anytime, he's going to be here. And the further I went down, the madder I got, because I wanted to get these operations over with and get out and get on with my life. But anyway, I turned around and went back and I said, check me out. And I checked out of the hospital. I had to find out sometime can I take care of myself or can I not? It's a good time to find out, and that'll show them I'm not going to be here forever. And it's another way after I met your mom, she checked up on me once in a while to see if I was still alive.
Yeah, they do that until they marry you and ruin your life. And that's what they do.
Completely mess it up.
Yeah. So, Dad, you know, when you were in the hospital, before you were released, I know there was a bunch of years you were in the hospital, you lost the use of your legs because you'd been, they'd atrophied, and so you had to relearn how to walk, and what else do you have to relearn to do?
Well, so much of my body was burned on the top and the legs and everything. You couldn't, most burns or whatever, you can keep, or any injury, you keep them turned. But with me, you couldn't, so of course my back, my legs and everything contracted and froze up. And the one doctor that said he could keep me alive told me later on I was walking. And he says, you can thank your therapist for that. He says, you should have never been able to walk again, but she worked on you till she got your legs in shape. And my back was also all frozen, fused up together. And she used to do my back, you know how I'd crank up hospital beds. She'd put pillows behind my back and crank it up to where I couldn't go, to where it'd start breaking it loose. And she'd tell me when you can't take it anymore, because it wasn't pleasant.
Like a car accident with fire. I'm wondering how unpleasant that could be.
But she'd say, tell me when you can't take it anymore, and when I'd get to the point I couldn't, I'd tell her, so she'd give 2 or 3 more cranks and then let it down, you know?
Yeah.
But I don't have a fused vertebrae in my back. So.
Yeah. You also so you had to relearn to walk, and then you also had...
The hardest thing I ever heard when I learned to walk, the hardest thing I ever heard to learn was how to get up out of a chair. And when you think of it, how do you get up out of a chair? And both of my eyes were grafted over because they thought I couldn't see, and to protect my eyes, to protect the corneas. The eyes were grafted over. And so I would have to lean forward, and she would sit down and try getting up, sit down and try getting up and tell me how she did it. So I would lean over, but when I leaned over to the point where she said I was over my feet to where I could raise myself, I would think I was that far over. If I raise up this point, I'm going to fall on my head. But finally and I had lost I weighed about 70 pounds, and I got to the point where I could try to raise up, and I'd get maybe an inch or 2 off the seat and just not have the strength to fall back down. And it took me about an hour or so before I finally managed to get to my feet. And then from there, I learned to walk. I'd learned to walk a good bit before that, but with a corpsman on each side to make sure I don't fall and bust myself, which I just about did a couple of times.
So, you mentioned that they had grafted over your eyes. You couldn't see because they had put skin grafts over your eyes. So how is it that you can see now?
Well, they left a hole on each side to flush saline and through to keep all the junk cleaned out from inside under the grafts. And one day I happened to roll my eye over this direction for some reason. And through this hole I could see something out there, and I was looking around. I said, that looks like a foot of a bed. Yep, that is a foot of a bed. Over there's another bed. And I looked around, and I could see up and down the ward. And so when I told him, they called the eye doctor. He said, no, I said, it's his imagination. He can't see.
And he's going to be dead and he can't walk, so...
So he come in and he looked at it and looked through it and said, by golly, he is looking out through there. He took me over to the little operating room they had on the floor and cut a slit in the middle of it. And so I could look out through there, but it was sort of foggy and whatever, because I still have a little scar right in the center of my cornea. And I asked him, I said, well, is that fog going to go away? He said, Gene, I'm not going to tell you a doggone thing. He said, you've made a liar out of me more times than I can see. So he wasn't going to make any bets on me in any way, shape, or form.
So, I'm just thinking, as you think about the kind of junk that came into your life out of nowhere, after dealing with people for the last 25 years of ministry, when things happen, even sometimes smaller things, people are like, God, I'm really angry at you. Why me? Why did you do this to me? Why me? I was trying to be good. You ever asked why me?
It never entered my mind. It was me. Nothing is going to do is change it. And until you asked me that, why me, it's never really entered my mind as to why me. It's, like I say, it is what it is, and there's nothing you can do to change it. You can't blame it on somebody else. And if I wish it on somebody else, who do I hate enough that I would want to wish it on, So I would never think of it.
Never mad at God about it?
No. Why would I be mad at God? I don't think it's God's fault.
It's just uncommon. It's just that it's uncommon.
Just because I got a ride with a driver that didn't know how to drive, that's not God's fault.
That's it. I know. I'm just saying, but it's so uncommon for people to not go, why me? And where are you, God? And that's always been, I thought, an interesting part of your, of your life story. So now you're hurt. You're burned. Of course, you've had a lot of reconstructive surgery. They've given you a nose again and ears and all this. And
I do.
Well, I'm not figuring. You lost your nose. I'm not sure why mine is this way. You had one and I got nothing. But they reconstructed everything up on you. But before that, you're laying in the hospital. What was your life plan? You've been burned up. You've lost your arms.
Well, to go back to what you were saying before, do I blame God? And no, I have never doubted God in any way. And as a matter, I thank Him for everything that He's given me to that point. Even though I am, He gave me an awful lot. Otherwise, I'd have been 6 feet under. So I've never questioned that. My plans for after I got hurt was I'm still in the Navy, and I could fly any place with space available on any military plane, any place. So my idea is, when I get out, I'm going to start getting on a plane. You going to Germany? Okay, let me go to Germany. Run around Germany. Where you got a plane? Do you got one in Japan? Okay, let me go to Japan. Just run around the world, enjoy myself. And then, of course, your mother came along.
Wrecked your world travel plan.
Yeah, ruined my plans altogether.
This happens. Thanks for warning me. We're kidding, man. My mom and dad stayed married till my mom passed away a few years back. And like I said, man, I had this child. You might think, gosh, you have a dad who doesn't have hands, or kids teased me when I was a kid about it. Once they teased me one time, and I just had this great family. Our family was different. But we had this great family. And I was thinking about today, Dad and I were just talking, hanging out, and I go, I always felt really secure. I always knew I was loved. I knew my parents loved one another. And I had this really kind of a magical little Prince Chucky kind of world. And I'm going to, we'll throw to that in a minute. But
as far as that goes, you could tell that he didn't get spanked near enough.
Yeah. Okay, I got to tell a story.
The reason he didn't get spanked, you can't hit a kid with a hook. So I use these thongs, old thongs you get a hold of them.
Okay, thongs are something different now.
Yeah, not the ones you wear on your feet. Flip-flops.
Am I still working? I just had that thing fall off my belt pack. Are we working? Okay, so here's the lowest moment. Go ahead, you got a story?
I'd pick up one of those slippers and I'd try to hit him with it. Well, as you reach out, the hook opens. That would throw it across the room and get me to laughing. You can't whip him and laugh at the same time.
So if you wonder why I'm weirded out, it's because I was beaten with thongs, So, okay, here's a low moment. I told my dad this the other day, and I thought I got to share it. Okay, this is my lowest moment as a human being. I'm in junior high. I have really bad distance vision, and there's a gal walking up through the schoolyard. We're standing on the 3 steps up on the cement thing, and this guy, Steve Parker, and I stand there. And I don't know this, but it's the school lady gym teacher, right? And it's Steve's neighbor. He knows her real well. And so he says, hey, what's going on? So I throw something at her. I just thought it's some schoolgirl. I said something really rude and probably sexually inappropriate. I don't remember. I blocked it out. But I said something. Next thing I know, she approaches very quickly, gets a hold of me, drags me to the office, puts me in the principal's office. The principal comes in and goes, where did you learn to talk to women like that? Didn't your dad take his hand and beat you for that? And I'm like, here's my moment. I start making myself cry. I'm like, cry. I'm like, my dad doesn't have hands. And I got out scot-free, and I told my dad that the other day. That was the only time I've ever been disingenuous in my entire life, though. So, that was I remember afterwards going, I won! And then I went outside and I'm like, oh, I'm scum. So we had this great family. My dad would go out of his way. We couldn't buy like a Halloween costume. My dad had to make one. And he would make things like I would be like a Trojan warrior, and that means something else different now.
Oh, yeah.
This one was with like a helmet and a sword.
I didn't make him one of those.
Yeah, beaten with thongs. And I was a robot, and all this stuff my dad would make. When it was Christmas, we lived in Los Angeles County. He didn't have a fireplace, so he would make a fireplace out of boxes and cover it with this fake brick stuff so that there would be a place for Santa to come down. And my mom would make me little sandwiches, and they would fill up a swimming pool, a little blow-up swimming pool in the backyard. And we have these videos of me wearing sunglasses in the swimming pool, eating little sandwiches, little Prince Chucky. And it was really pretty embarrassing. But my family, I had this great family. Now here's the deal. My dad is hurt. He's 24 years old. A few years goes by. He doesn't have all the reconstructive surgery that he has now, but he's in the hospital, bedridden, after being burned completely up. And he meets my mom. And they fall in love. And so, Dad, how'd you meet Mom?
Well, she came to work in the hospital that I was in the VA hospital, and the nurse's locker was down in the basement. And from what she told me this later, she had said this beautiful pair of legs, as she called them. I wear Navy, you have to wear bell bottoms and so on. And I had bow legs anyway, so the bow legs and bell bottoms, she said she fell in love with my legs. And after she saw my face and whatever, she said, I'm going to be assigned to his ward. And, of course, she was. And as time went on, we got to be friends. And like I say, when I decided to check myself out, she would check in about once a week, to check to see I was still alive and this, that, and the other. And we started dating and going out. And
where'd you guys go out? You're living in New York.
Oh, yeah. Well, is there anything but bars in New York?
Yeah.
No, actually, we'd go to, a dinner date, go to the club. And we had 2 or 3 favorite clubs we'd go to. And she's Puerto Rican, so we'd go to Puerto Rican club one weekend, American club the next weekend, and so on. And we got to talking. Well, marriage had come up a couple of times in conversation.
That's what they do to you. That's what they do to you.
So I don't remember just exactly how it went down, but I asked her if she'd want to get married, or should we get married? And she said, yeah, and here we are.
Yeah.
And she was a bigamist for a few weeks, a couple of months.
Yeah, I just found that out today. Her divorce from her prior husband hadn't gone through, and like, oh, really? He's like, yeah, you're not really legitimate. And, okay. So here's my mom, my dad. They live in a 5th floor walk-up in New York and in the Bronx in New York. And my dad decides, and I get born, which is like just amazing anyway. Right? So now here I am. We've got the Latina woman. We've got my dad. We've got me. And my dad decides we need, his son needs pets. So he figures, you know what this kid needs? He needs a dog. He needs a boy's dog. And somewhere along the line, my dad decides that we need a giant poodle. And so and evidently the dog's name was Fifi. So now we have my dad, my mom, me, and this giant poodle named Fifi. But if that's not enough, my dad's buddy is the guy who runs the monkey house at the Bronx Zoo.
No, he's the head keeper at the ape house. He took care of the mountain gorillas and orangutans and so on. But they had a little squirrel monkey over there, which I liked very much, and what have you. So this guy was a big drinker and practical joker. So one day I got a knock at the door, and here's Mickey with hanging a roof over his shoulder, towing it, and his pet was this big mountain gorilla, and he did all kinds of practical jokes with her. And oh no, he's brought Oko with him, because he's tugging and pulling. And he finally pulls his brother, which is almost as big as the gorilla, holding this little monkey that's about this big, and that's how I come across the monkey. And then the dog came after the monkey. So now
it's the dog, the monkey, me, my mom, my dad, and there's all these stories about the monkey swinging off the Venetian blind cord out the window from the 5th floor, and people down below going, And so I have no idea what the name. And they would give the monkey like a green lollipop, give me a blue lollipop. A little while later, there was a swap. All that stuff. And so so look, if you want to know why I'm screwed up and jacked up and weirded out, okay, this is our life. And so we have some old footage, from those old movie reels that my dad used to take back in the 60s. And a guy named Simon, who comes to Elevation, was kind enough to put together a little home movie to give you a little viewpoint of our life as a as a fully functional family. If you watch the screens, this is the Gerwig home movies. Belligerent little baby.
We fell from trees, rows of houses, smoking chimneys. The lights would dance like a monkey with cymbals in his hands.
Now you see where I get it.
It's a man under the shoulder. Time takes its toll. Soft way, sound away. I sell my dreams to my life. And once from the ground. Send you my love from out of town.
Thanks, Simon. A short independent film by Simon. It was a beautiful thing. He actually wrote the song for it. They couldn't find music that they liked, so they pulled out the banjo and wrote the song for it. It's a beautiful thing, man. Thank you, guys. It's interesting when you think about life and you think about the kinds of things that can either derail you. People get stuck, don't they? Do you ever meet anybody that's got stuck? Maybe you're like that. That something happens. Maybe you did it. Maybe somebody else did it. Or maybe it's the circumstance of life. And junk comes into your life and you get stuck. And tonight what we're really talking about, in fact, is you don't have to. You know, you can't choose the circumstance of your life. My dad did not choose the circumstance of his life. But he chose his response and his attitude. And as a result, he blessed not only himself, but my mom, me, my wife, and children who wouldn't be in this room. And maybe people that God has used and that we've been able to minister to over the years. So now I got a couple questions for you just about kind of life and, God and how he's worked in it. For a lot of people, they would go through what you've gone through. I mean, you joke about it like, oh, it'd be unpleasant to be in a car accident. I mean, you're the master of understatement. But you've been through all these operations that had to have been really painful. And obviously, you've had people be rude to you, stare at you. You've had, it's hard for you to do certain things, like put a light bulb in, things that we would take for granted. After all the stuff that happened to you, why is life worth living? Why is life worth living?
Well, I can look at you as an example of if it was worth staying alive. And as a matter of fact, even if you hadn't come along, like I say, I was going to travel all over the world, so I'm going to enjoy myself. But as things turned out, I had a much better life. And to me, it was say if I could I could crawl into a shell or whatever, make myself miserable, and everybody else around me miserable, or I can go out and enjoy myself. And I enjoy myself, and most people enjoy me too. You have a few that don't. Can't please everybody. But you do have a few that, like I say, come up an inch from above you and stare at you, and look at you and so on. But leprosy generally moves them back an inch or two.
Yeah, tell them you're a leper. That's awesome. I've seen my dad do some crazy stuff, and a little kid comes up here and he goes, "What happened to you, mister?" And he goes, "You don't play with matches, do you?" Beautiful, beautiful. Hey, you were telling the story about you and this buddy of yours from the hospital that both had amputations, and what was the deal with that toll booth guy?
Oh, yeah. Well, the both of us had been were in the VA hospital. Well, actually, he was in Manhattan and I was in the Bronx, but we'd both been in a naval hospital at the same time. When he was a young kid, he was only 17, when he was in Marine training and holding a live grenade in their training, and then while while his instructor drills him about it, and talks about the grenade. Well, he happened to get one with a short fuse, and it went off, and he lost both of his legs, one clear up into his hip, and the other one very high, and lost one arm above the elbow. And, of course, he was pretty low, and like I say, he was just a kid, and they needed someone to sort of cheer him up a little bit. And so another friend and I took him in a wheelchair down to the rec room, and I played ping pong with the other guy, and I only see with one eye and not too good with it, but as long as the ball was coming back and forth, I could sit there and volley. So he went down there, and then he decided, hey, yeah, you can go without an arm and legs and so on, So anyway, when the both of us were away from there, we decided we'd go back over to Philly, over to the Naval Hospital and visit the old joint. And he just bought a brand new Lincoln. And we got on what they check what time you get on at a booth and what time you get off. And I don't think we went under 100 any place along the line. And then he just had one leg and no arms when he wanted to. Well, let me see. Yeah, it was both arms and one leg. I had it reversed before, and the one leg was clear up into the hip. But anyway, when he had a magic bar on his radio. When he'd want to change, he'd raise his foot. I can't because of the knee. But he'd reach his toe up there and tap it, change the station. So to make a long story short, we got off at the booth at the other end, and the guy looked at the time that we had been on the freeway and looked in, sees 3 legs and no arms, and looked at us and he says, "You better slow it down, boys."
He was going to give you a ticket. You were telling a story about how they had you go down with the kid playing ping pong to show him that his life could be good. And you had told another story about the guy whose hands they had sewed into his legs to heal.
Yeah, he had both hands burned. They'd sewed them into his thighs and had the full skin over the top so they could put full thickness skin over his hands. But he complained constantly. And the doctor got tired of hearing him complain, and I had my own room in the back of the ward, and they ran in. The doctor came in, grabbed my bed, pushed it up through the ward where this guy, and looked, and he says, "Look at this guy. I never hear him complain at all." He says, "Now, if you have another complaint, why, let me know." And it was the last time that the guy ever complained about anything.
Yeah. God also has used you in the lives of just strangers on the street. Share a little about that.
Yeah, people come up all the time. That just doesn't happen just occasionally, but all the time. People will come up to you 4 or 5 times a year probably and say thank you. Just for being you. I thought I had problems, but if you can handle your problems, I have no problems. And so to thank you very much just for being me.
As we think about this idea of how God has used it, you said something to me one time. You said a lot of things that I remember really well. And one of the things you said to me was, you said, it's made me a better man. That the accident made you a better man. How's that?
Well, I don't know what I would be otherwise. I mean, you often wonder what road you go down. But before, I was a sailor, and doing my best to live up to a sailor's reputation. And so I don't know whether I would have kept on that road or not. But after being injured and what have you, like I say, just by being an example many times to others, I think I'm probably a better man than I would have been in any other way. And you'd ask, would I change anything? No, at this point I would not. Yeah. If he'd asked me a couple of months after the accident, I'd probably, I'd like to go back and take that ride back.
Yeah. You were alluding to that you had shared with me. Another thing that I really remember was I asked you one time when I was a young guy, I was like, well, would you take it back? Would you do it different? And you said that you wouldn't. That you wouldn't have avoided the accident. Why?
No, because I know what I have now, and I have good family. I have good. I got married, had a good family, good grandchildren, everything. I mean, I couldn't ask for, but if everyone has half as good a life as I have had, then I don't think anyone has any complaints at all. So no, I wouldn't change anything.
Yeah,
It's a great life.
that's superhuman, Dad. That's superhuman.
What do you expect from your dad, though?
I don't know. Yeah.
Every son should feel that way about his dad.
Yeah, and I have, you know. I don't know if I've ever told you this. I've never, ever wanted another dad. You know, I remember you used to say, "Oh, I wish I had hands so I could throw the baseball to you."
There would have been a few times. There would have been a few times I think you would have said.
Well, you know, when you're a teenager, you're like, "You're so unfair. You're the meanest dad."
You don't know. You don't know a thing.
You know, you don't know anything. You know, but
I could throw a baseball to you.
I know you did. You almost broke my nose with it. You know, so you pepper one in, Dad. Pepper one in. Next thing I know, everything's all white. My mom's yelling at him, "Why'd you throw a ball at the kid's face?" You know.
I kept throwing it to him, and he kept telling me, "Burn it in, Dad, burn it in." So I kept burning it in. So he just tipped his glove one time right on into his nose.
Burned into the top of my cranium, you know.
But then when I got to thinking about it, sometimes I hope everybody doesn't think just right sometimes. I was only throwing it the length of a garage, and I was throwing it awfully hard for that short of a distance.
Yeah,
he probably doesn't have any time to react to it, but it did dawn on me till it was too late.
You know, but I never
that
wanted
made
it.
me feel guilty, though.
But you know, I never wanted a different dad. And like I said, we just had this great life because my dad chose for us to have a good life. It was an act of his will, and in the face of, I would imagine, I don't know anything different. Like I didn't know my dad without hands. My mom didn't. You know, she met him as he was in the hospital, married him. I never saw him any different. My kids, if you know my oldest daughter, Carly, Andrea had taught her this little Hungarian nursery rhyme where it's like a rabbit runs around and goes down the rabbit hole or something. You do it in the palm of the child's hand. And she's not very old. I know she's probably 4 or 5. She comes up to my dad, or maybe 3 or 4, and she goes up to my dad because she's going to do it to him, takes his hook and goes, "Appa, you don't have hands." See, we never knew any different. All I know is that I had this great life. And that is a gift from my heavenly dad, but also from my earthly dad, who chose to have a great life. And God has used the circumstances of his life. And I'm going to close this little segment with this story of a guy at my last church, a guy named Randy. He's a Vietnam vet, pretty unhappy guy. He lived on our block, and everybody was scared of Randy because he's the kind of guy you'd probably be scared of. And Randy's wife started coming to our little Wednesday night dinners with all the elderly people of the church, and she really liked it, and she drugged him, and we're thinking, "Oh, boy, he's not going to like that." And he got saved. He found Jesus. Just changed his life. So Randy's a pretty tough guy, works for the electrical company. He's up in the bucket, but he's radically saved. Man, he's telling everybody about Jesus, and people are like, "Yeah, we want to hear from you." And so he backed up into serious high power in the bucket. He was really hurt, really bad. He had burns, electrocution, and he was in the VA hospital in Westwood in Southern California. We used to live down by there. And Randy goes to the guy who's a therapist, old Navy therapist who's working at the hospital. And he says, "Hey, by the way, do you believe in God?" And the therapist says, "Oh, I believe in God." And he said, "A long time ago, there was this man named Gene who should have never been alive, and he was alive. And he would come in here with his little son holding his hook. And it was me and my dad. And this guy said, I've been telling that story to patients forever, that there's a God because he kept this guy alive and gave him this life and gave him a child." And so I've seen how God has used the junk that came into my dad's life for my good, for the greater good of people all around him, and I think for my dad's good too. So I want to thank you, Dad, for coming and sharing with us. Really special for me to get to have you here with me. I love you very much. Thank you.
It's been very special to me. You know, of course, you know how much I love you. To put up with you this many years, I have to love you.
Yeah. All right, thanks, Dad. You're the man. Thank you, Dad. Yeah, so we had this really interesting family. And So that's sometimes, some of the strange things that you see coming out of me really are because, I just see the world maybe a little bit differently because my dad has, and he's passed that on to me. So what I want to do is I'm only going to share I'm lying to you. I'm going to share 2 verses of Scripture with you as we close this section and get ready to move into some worship time. And the point of this is this, this junk came into my dad's life not because he did anything or somebody else did something wrong. It came in as a matter of the circumstances of his life. Of all the people I've ever met in my life, and he hasn't told you the half. He wouldn't even tell you the half of the pain. He wouldn't tell you the half of people being really rude to him. Going into the supermarket and seeing adults look at him and creep around and get another adult to come and stare at him. He would never tell you about that, but what he would tell you is, man, I wouldn't change it. You know what? I've chosen to live well, and he's lived well. And so here's what I want to submit to you. I don't know what the junk is that's in your life. Maybe it's your own. Maybe you brought it. Maybe someone else brought it. Maybe it's circumstantial. Maybe you were born into a rotten family. There are rotten families. Maybe you were born into a situation where you have limits on you that maybe some other people don't have. Maybe you don't see. Maybe you can't hear. You know what? Here's the deal. You can't choose your circumstances. We're in a broken world. And we forget about it because we're pretty rich Americans. Even the poorest of us, we're doing pretty good. And we forget that we live in a broken world. And yet, we can choose to live this excellent life. It's a matter of choosing based on truth. If you have a Bible, open up to Romans chapter 8. It's verse 28, and you've heard it before. And I hope that forever, I can't look at this verse and not think of my dad. If this Bible was a picture Bible, there'd be a picture of my dad next to it for me. I hope for the rest of your life, when you read this verse, there'll be a picture of my good-looking, cool dad next to this verse for you. Romans 8:28 says this, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose." And it's really important to understand that when he says this, he is just a few verses early in verse 22 said he also knew something else. He says, we know that the whole world is broken and it's groaning because it's broken. The world is broken and broken things happen to people. Cars explode into flames and people get sick. People get cancer. People are born and they have no legs. Really crazy stuff. Why? Because we know that the whole world is broken. That's the story of the Bible. But God is about redemption. He's about reclaiming and redeeming and making something beautiful out of something that sucks. That's what God does by nature. In this verse, in verse 22, he says, the planet's broken. Verse 20 says, Paul says, look, we know, I know something. And the word here for know is oidos. Oidos. And oidos means this. It means I comprehend this. Here's something that I understand. This is what he understands with certainty. He says, I understand with certainty that in all things, God's working for the good. In all things. Some people are stupid. Have you noticed this? Here's your sign. Some people are stupid. They go, everything's good. Everything's good. No, it's not. No, it's not. Have you ever had McDonald's French fries the next morning? It's not good, right? It's not. They congeal into some kind of other substance that you can see what it's going to do to your veins when you eat it, right? So there's some things that are just not good. My dad's accident was not good. God didn't cause my dad's accident. It doesn't say God caused all things. It says here, God works in all things. Not all things are good. In all things, everything. The good things and the bad things. You know what caused my dad's accident? Mass plus movement plus impact. That's what caused my dad's accident. Because we know that the whole world is groaning under the weight of a brokenness. And we live in it. And to try to say that everything's good, it's all good. No, it's not. It's not all good. It's not all good. It wasn't good that happened to my dad. But God was in the midst of it. God works in the junkyard. Man, he's an artisan. He goes in the junkyard and he goes, watch what I make out of this. Watch what I make out of this. If you look at this, it says, now we know that in all things God works. It's saying here that God isn't static. And the Christian story, it's funny how in late 20th century we've become to think that the Christian story is about this. Somebody tells you that God loves you, has a plan for your life,
You're in sin. You need God. You can be saved. And then it's kind of like, great. If you receive that, then you go, okay, I'm okay. And then God says, okay, you stand over here till you die. I've got other things to do. But that's not the way it is. The way it is this. God is continuously at work. When it says here that God works, the tense there in the Greek that this was originally written in is this. It's saying God is continually working. He's continually working for the good. He's continually at work. It's not like you say yes to God and he goes, okay, great. Now you're saved. That's all. It's not a static relationship. There's an ongoing work of God, and nothing surprises him. In the stock market, some of us, to some of you, I don't have any money, but some of you have seen your 401k get to a scary place. And you may not have the money that you thought you were going to have to retire. And I don't know anything about that, but one thing I know, in all things, that means the good things and the bad things, in all things, God is continuously at work. He's continuously at work. Now, the truth, the fact that this is true is awesome. Does that make you feel better? I don't know if it does or not. But it is simple truth, is that there's this God who is working. And the crazy thing is, if you look at the first word there, the big first golden word, it says, for in all things, God works. The master of the universe. He doesn't crush us up in a can and like throw us away. He says, look, I love you. You're broken. The world is broken. But in everything that happens, there is nothing that's going to happen that I am not at work in. And I am God. It is God who is at work in this world. And I'll tell you what, when you start to believe this, it makes it easier to make the kinds of choices that I've seen Gene Gerwig make. Is you believe that, I don't know, I can sit around and ask the why question. Have you noticed that is not a question that gets a lot of answers? I don't know that it's a productive question. It's a natural question. I don't know that it's a production. I asked my dad, you ever ask why? No. Well, I mean, that'd be a dumb question. I don't know. But the one thing I know is that in everything, this verse tells us that God is continually at work. God himself, God of God. There's nothing you're going to do, nothing that's going to be done to you, nothing that's going to come out of the blue. Sorry, I didn't mean for that to rhyme. It's like, dang, man, give me a TV evangelist show. I'll put my hair up and get like clear plexiglass pulpit and put your hand on the TV, brothers. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Those guys can just go wherever they're going to go and do whatever they're going to do. I just don't want to be them when Jesus shows up, And I'm sure there's some good ones. I don't want to judge, but I'm judging, okay? Here's the deal. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to rhyme, but here's the deal. It doesn't matter what happens. God, the creator and the master of the universe, he loves his people. And he says, regardless of what comes into your world, I will work it for the good. I will work it for the good. I am certain that there's things that have happened. Like I heard the story from Randy, my friend, and I was so stoked to hear that story about him going to the therapist, right? But I'll bet there's a lot of stories where my dad has worked that I'll never hear, that my dad will never hear. But God has been working. God has continued to work. He's 79 years old. You can't kill him. I mean, he's going to be much long, probably another 79 years. My dad will be here, and we'll all be gone, and God will still be using him, and he'll still be using his story. Because it is God himself who works. And who's going to confound the work of the master of the universe? No one. And he's continually at work. And it gives a little disclaimer there. It says, he works for the good. He works for the good of those who love him. And it took me years in studying this verse to find that it doesn't say that he works for the good of everybody. Those who love him are the ones that, some people will call them Christians or followers of Christ. That he is at work specifically for those who say, you are my God. I'm your kid. There's no guarantees. God doesn't waste pain in the life of a believer. But I don't know if pain may be wasted on people who just reject God. Because there's no promise that says God is continually at work for those who reject him and blow him off and hate him. It says those who love him, though. For those who love him, those who are his kids, he's active. Not just in helping you get to heaven one day. He's active right now. And he takes your pain, which matters, by the way. He takes my pain, which matters, by the way. Takes all of our junk and he says, and I'm going to use it for your good. That doesn't mean it is good. All things good and bad. Doesn't mean it's good. But I will use it for you because I love you. The last thing this verse says, it's packed with goodness. It's like a Snickers bar. for the good of those who love him, these people who have been called according to his purpose. That who has the purpose? Who does the calling? God. Who has the purpose? God. There's the plan and purpose of the God who knows your name and who loves you more than anything, and no one can confound him. And he says, and I've called you Mavoine, and I've called you Chuck, and I've called you Nancy, and I've called you Thud. I've called you to myself, and I have a purpose. I have a plan. It's not random. And if you're tempted to think otherwise, that's really between you and this. It's not between you and I. I can't tell you what to think, and I don't propose to do that. I do. I'm lying again. I propose to tell you what to think. Now, weigh it out and see if I'm an idiot. Quiet, Dad. Hang it. I just thought I could hear his thinking, I challenge you to weigh it out. The Bible says this. When you know the truth will set you. It'll set you free. If the Bible is true, and I believe that it is, it says this. It says, we are certain that in everything, the good things and the bad things, God himself, the master of the universe, is continually at work for the good of those who have been called by him, called by his name, called his son, according to his purpose. He's got a purpose and a plan, and this world is not random. And if you choose to believe that, and that's my prayer for you, if you choose to believe that, it doesn't matter what kind of storm comes in, because when the storm comes in, you can look at it a little different, like my dad did, and say, God is up to something. This is a storm. God is up to something. There's a prayer in Ephesians 1. You're going to hear me talk about this a lot if you hang around here. I love this prayer. Paul's praying for the Ephesian church, and it's my prayer for you as I thought about you this week. And it says this, Ephesians 1:18. Paul says, I pray also that the eyes of your heart, the inner person, might be enlightened. He goes, I want the inside of you to light up in order that, what? That you may know. Oidos, that you might be convinced, that you might know in the same way that he says, I know God is at work in everything in my life, and he's going to bring it around for good. Everything. He says that same word, in order that you may know with certainty the hope that he's called you to. Do you feel hope in all the crud and junk of your life? He says, I'm praying that God will show you, then you will know the hope that he's called you to, the riches of the glorious inheritance in the saints of those who are his people, and his incomparably great power for those who believe. Again, for those who believe, this great power and this great hope, that you might know it with certainty. You might understand it with certainty. They can put you in a car. The car can burn up. They can pull you out. They can tell you you're never going to walk. You're never going to see. You can't live more than a few years. And 55 years later, you're going, I've had a good life. I hope your life is as good as mine. Because God takes all and he works for the good. And that is true. You cannot choose your circumstances, but you can choose your responses. You can't choose your circumstances, but you can choose your attitude. And if you know the truth, that God will work them for your good because he loves you and he is God himself. If you know that truth, it will set you free from getting stuck and spinning your wheels in all the stuff of your past. Because you know that God can use even that horrible incident, those horrible incidents, and the horrible incidents that may come. Because he knows you, he loves you, he has a plan, a purpose. He is God, and he is actively working those things out. Will you pray with me? Lord, thanks so much for my dad. I thank you that he's my dad, and I thank you. I pray that you'd give him many more years to just continue to be your servant. I know that you use him every day in ways that we'll probably never know. And thank you for blessing me. Thank you for letting me be born because you saved him. Thank you for bringing my wonderful mom into our life and giving me life through her. Thank you for giving life to Carly and Jesse through me, through him. And God, I just pray that you would just bring rich blessing into his life and every area of his life. I pray especially right now, Lord, just for his knees and all the trouble he's having with them being all tore up. And I pray that you'd give him greater mobility than he's ever had, and that you would bring healing and wholeness to him. And God, for my friends, I pray, God, I ask like Paul did for his friends in the Ephesian church. I pray that they would know with certainty that you are at work in everything that is bad and in the good things. That you will turn them for good. That you will use them for your glory and for our benefit in the end. We may never know why. We know you don't cause everything, but you bring the flowers out of that dirt every single day, and we love you for it. We ask you to help us to live in the knowledge of the truth, that we might live the kind of life that I've seen my dad live, one filled with joy and enjoyment, happiness, goodness, generosity, because we're not stuck worrying that you've left us behind, because you don't do that. So we thank you again. Thanks again for this kind of weird evening that you've given us together. And so, God, the only thing that we can do that makes sense is to worship you, because you are a great God. Amen.